If you're like many others, you first heard of Jiu Jitsu on Joe Rogan or watching MMA and it piqued your interest. Maybe you had a friend that made it sound super accessible and fun, and he convinced you to stop by an open mat or a trial class one day. And despite how difficult it was, you saw all these other working professionals participating in a sport in a way that you just don't see all that often, especially for something centered around live combat. And what really got you hooked was how surprisingly cerebral the art was. Sure, it was a great workout, but class left your mind racing. You'd search techniques online, watch match breakdowns, anything to scratch that mental itch for progress. And man, was that progress addictive. Go from a completely uncoordinated fish out of water to the proverbial shark in the ocean. You know, the kind of dudes who used to shove you into lockers 10 years ago. Big O's. But then that first injury hits, and your obsession is taken away from you for a few weeks. Man, you get some confusing advice from the wise sages you go to class with. You go online hoping for some clarity, and it's even more conflicting information. What the hell do you do now? Do you just tuck your possibly broken arm in your belt and keep training like that old lanky brown belt who walks funny? Do you rub CBD on it and sit in a sensory deprivation tank like your 10th planet buddy said you should? Is it really possible that those FP weirdos really never feel pain, and all you have to do is spin around with a kettlebell like you're a Beyblade? At this point, you'll honestly do anything, as long as it's not an early morning ice bath with that weird anti-vax dude before you ground yourself on your morning walk to his favorite naked yoga spot in the woods, where he does happy baby facing east to recharge his perineum by the power of the rising sun. Before we jump into some solutions, let me tell you a little bit about myself so you know that I'm not just some influencer talking out my ass. My name's Alex Sterner, and I own Electrum Performance in San Diego, California. This is a strength and conditioning gym where we work primarily with Jiu Jitsu athletes. I've worked with plenty of practitioners, from multiple-time world champions all the way to hobbyists who are looking to get out of pain and just extend the life of their Jiu Jitsu career a little bit more. Overall, our facility has seen more Jiu Jitsu athletes than any other one gym in the world, and it's been this way for a long time. But I'm not just a strength and conditioning coach. I've also trained Jiu Jitsu myself since 2004, and I've seen the many ways that this sport has changed and evolved in that time. And despite how much the sport has changed, I've also worked in other Division I sports and can see just how far we have to go. The biggest difference that I see between Jiu Jitsu and other established sports is what athletes do off the mats to really make sure that their bodies are adequately prepared for their demands within the sport. And I'm not sure why this part lags behind in Jiu Jitsu so much. Maybe it has to do with the old saying, strength versus technique, as if we have to choose between one of these variables. Or maybe it's just the fact that people who train Jiu Jitsu didn't really tend to have experience in strength training in the past. But for whatever reason, there's a lot of improvement that we can do off the mats to really enhance and increase the duration of time that we spend on the mats throughout the rest of our life. While this may come as a surprise, I think the sport that really highlights the value of strength training is actually cross country. In cross country, a 300-pound squat won't decrease the time it takes for you to run a mile. But cross-country athletes definitely squat. They do this because of the positive adaptations that occur from squatting, the changes that will occur in the bone, tendons, and ligaments that allow them to have higher training volumes and spend more time running. This prevents those chronic overuse injuries that you'll see from people who don't lift weights. And this is primarily from the general adaptations that occur from those large sweeping movements in the weight room. Those bang for your buck exercises that you're probably familiar with. Your squats, your deadlifts, your bench press, those sort of things. Another way that we can look at this general adaptation is in the shoulders of someone who can bench 500 pounds. That person was clearly not capable of withstanding those forces when they were born or when they first came into adulthood. Not only were their muscles not strong enough, but their joints actually couldn't withstand that force. If you look at the course of that person's strength training career, adaptations occurred not just in the muscle, but in the bones and connective tissue that allowed that person to support that much weight. That sort of general adaptation is the benefit that we look for in strength training. Sure, it's cool to see improvements in performance, but the best thing that we can do for ourselves in the weight room is allow our joints to change, much like in that 500-pound bench presser or like that cross-country runner, that allows us to withstand greater forces on the mats and spend less of our time sidelined by injury. So while I will get into some very specific exercises that we can do while maybe we are injured, I want you to really focus on those preventative things, those big bang for your buck exercises that may not look exactly like the things we do in jiu-jitsu, but really allow our joints, connective tissue, and our skeleton to change in a way that makes it more resilient and less prone to injury. These examples also highlight why lower threshold activities, things like yoga or light stretching or more functional training that you'll see, mace work, that sort of thing, doesn't apply a stressor that promotes long-term change the same way that traditional strength training does. It's not that these things are useless, they're just not going to create a more robust system that allows us to increase our training frequency. Those feel-good exercises can be done as maybe maintenance or to allow us to feel better for a specific training session, but they're not going to provide the lasting results that allow us to prevent injury. So in today's video, I'm going to get into the different ways that we may experience injury and the different joints that that's associated with. But most importantly, at the end of the video, I'm going to get into the mental approach, the way that you can really fit injuries into this overall framework and take direct action so that you can pull yourself out of that injury and extend the length of your jiu-jitsu career. So if you're dealing with an injury right now, you're welcome to jump to the section that addresses that specific issue. If not, there's value in watching all the way through and certainly watching the mental approach at the end of the video. Let's get to it. Before we dive into the physical side of the injuries in our sport, let me just say that this video is not meant to treat or diagnose any sort of specific injury. Nothing can replace an in-person professional, so I would highly recommend finding a cash-based PT in your area so you can lean on them anytime you have an injury that's tough to figure out. So for each body part today, I'm gonna go over two distinct sections. One is gonna be the lower threshold stuff that you can do if you're currently experiencing a tweak or an injury. And two, I'm going to get into some of those more advanced progressions or the things that are going to really elicit long-term change and prevent further injury to that region. So let's jump into the neck. The neck is one of the most commonly abused parts of the body while on the mats, ranging from clubs to stacks to direct submissions like guillotines and rear naked chokes. The neck takes a lot of direct trauma while we're on the mats. Combined with the fact that it's maybe one of the most undertrained areas off the mats, this is a recipe for consistent neck issues. And it's no coincidence that almost every grappler after around, brown or even purple belt level has some sort of neck issue. If we're currently experiencing a flare-up in the neck, something like stability ball isometrics are a great way to apply force to the four main directions associated with our neck without any motion that may further agitate it. We can move further away from the wall for it to be a bit more advanced and to have some more loading, or we can get closer to the wall if our neck is particularly bothered at that point in time. Now, once our neck isn't really in pain, it's important that we begin to load the region and provide motion. Those old school neck harnesses are a great way to do it. Some people nowadays use the iron neck. That can be a good option. Or if you don't have any specialized equipment, even lying neck curls, where you hang your head off the edge of a bench, place a plate on a portion of your head and resist that motion, can be a great way to start to train the neck and the muscles associated with the neck through a full range of motion. Another commonly injured joint is the knee. Now, there's obvious ways that the knee is targeted in jiu-jitsu, like in leg locks with knee bars and heel hooks. But there's even positions like pummeling a leg inside to retain guard. It's very common to pop or potentially even tear your LCL while retaining guard and somebody places pressure on you. So if our knees are currently achy, one of the best things we can do is a timed wall sit. Keep in mind that we're trying to just get some activation and lubrication in the joint. We're not really trying to go for fatigue here. These can often be used before jiu-jitsu or lifting to decrease that pain response a little bit to allow us to get more effective training in. Another good low threshold exercise where we can start to involve some range of motion are banded TKE step downs. The band provides a little more resistance for the quad, and the motion allows us to start to load the knee and show our body that it's okay to be loaded and move through a range of motion. Now, contrary to what you see a lot online, there aren't any magical exercises to bulletproof our knees. You'll see a lot of things with the knees over toes brand, and while these aren't inherently bad or incorrect, they're also not magical. Straightforward, old-fashioned exercises like squats and lunges do a great job of progressively overloading these structures, and there's even data to show that it results in hypertrophy of the major ligaments of the knee, making them harder to injure. One special consideration that might be really worth your time is training your hamstrings through knee flexion, something like a Nordic hamstring curl. Because the hamstring tendons insert in a way that's parallel to our ACL, they can directly brace the ACL or help absorb force in a motion that might otherwise cause damage to that structure. So training our hamstrings is super important as well. The low back is a region that's very commonly injured or experiences pain in the general population. But the unique demands of Jiu Jitsu makes this a problem area for us as well. This region experiences a ton of motion in Jiu Jitsu, whether it's flexion while playing certain guards, barambolos, or getting stacked, but also a lot of the rotation that occurs in Jiu Jitsu, whether that's finishing a submission like a heel hook or a Kimura. The spine has a lot of mobility requirements in Jiu Jitsu. But it's not just about the mobility. There's also significant loading on that lower back. Think of maintaining a wrestling stance as somebody's clubbing your head. You'll often feel a burn in those erector muscles of the lower back. There's also significant loading in more extreme positions like stack passing. So how do we possibly prepare our body for this? Let's take a look. The lower back is not just one of the most commonly injured regions, but it can be particularly debilitating when we're in the midst of a flare-up. For that reason, sometimes we need some strategies that are a little more indirect for us to be able to decrease that pain response. Something like banded glute work, or even just a walk outside if we can manage it, can get that pain response a little bit lower, can increase our heart rate, and can allow us to potentially do something a little more direct to help pull us out of this flare-up. Once we can handle more direct work, something like a Superman cross crawl is a great way to tax the muscles that surround the low back without bringing us through a range of motion that the body might not be ready for yet. When it comes to training the back in a more healthy setting, people are usually a little bit off the mark in terms of how to do this and get ourselves ready for something multiplanar like Jiu Jitsu. We've got the obvious ones, braced exercises like squats and deadlifts. These exercises can allow us to experience a significant axial load and can make the structures surrounding the spine far more resilient. But we also want to make sure that we train each motion of the spine and do so under load. This is where exercises like Zercher deadlifts, loaded side bends, and rotational exercises like med ball throws can be a great way to really make sure that we're covering all of our bases and making sure that the spine isn't more susceptible to injury in any one region as soon as we get on the mats. Being the most mobile joint in the body, the shoulder has injury concerns in almost any sport. But in Jiu Jitsu, it's often specifically attacked. Moves like omoplatas, key locks, Kimuras all directly attack the shoulder and bring it to endpoint ranges of motion. There's also more indirect ways that we can injure the shoulder. If we don't break fall appropriately or are avoiding an off balance and sticking our arm or elbow out, we can experience damage to a region known as the AC joint in the shoulder. So let's look at a few different ways to address shoulder issues. So when the shoulders are in the middle of a flare-up, there's a couple different strategies we can use to address them. One is through isometrics, and banded internal or external rotation is a great way to introduce isometrics to the shoulder. We can also do some scapular exercises. Things like scap pull-ups from a dead hang or scap push-ups can allow us to train some of those smaller muscles around the shoulder and decrease pain. In a healthier setting, any sort of push or pull, be it vertical, horizontal, is a great way to load the shoulder incrementally over time. This incremental stress is going to allow that shoulder to not just be stronger in that plane, but in various contexts on the mat. But outside of regular pushing and pulling, there's another motion that I think is often overlooked that plays a huge role in shoulder health. And that's by addressing the long head of the biceps tendon. My favorite exercise to tax this region is an incline biceps curl. If you really go through a full range and feel a deep stretch at the bottom, you'll feel it not just across the elbow like any other biceps curl, but you'll feel it at the shoulder as well. And that's because this portion of the bicep also crosses the shoulder and plays a huge role in shoulder health. So make sure to sprinkle these in, not just for vanity, but for shoulder health. The armbar is maybe the most recognizable submission in jiu-jitsu. It comes as no surprise that our elbows end up taking some abuse. This is further compounded by the fact that they take a lot of impact as we avoid off balances or break fall incorrectly. Lastly, the repetitive motion of gripping can leave the tendons up by the forearm feeling less than great after high volume training. Let's check out ways to address this. Due to the fact that the elbow is actually made up of more than one joint, we can often benefit from doing some forearm work to fill in the gaps of the rest of our training. Things like pinch grip carries or extensor work can often have a very beneficial effect on the elbow. Other low threshold exercises like banded bicep curls or tricep pushdowns can do a really good job of increasing blood flow to the elbow and decreasing that pain response. Once we're healthy, traditional pushing and pulling is going to be the meat and potatoes of loading this region and making it more resilient. But even some good old-fashioned pump work, some bicep and tricep exercises, can do a great job of making this area less prone to injury. Some people argue that bicep and tricep work or anything resembling bodybuilding isn't functional. But if you're able to progressively load this region and increase its ability to tolerate force, it's going to make that region harder to injure. This is extremely functional if we're looking to increase the duration of our jiu-jitsu career. The strongest muscles of the body cross the hip, so it's no surprise that this region is the braking force behind many different submissions. Combined with the fact that this joint moves in all three planes, can end up feeling a bit beat up after some high volume training. Since our hips have to do so much in jiu-jitsu, it's pretty common for them to get tweaked or achy. When they are, we want to have a variety of low threshold exercises to really address these issues. A good place to start is some banded glute work or paused glute bridges. We can also start to tax the groin or adductors by doing things like Copenhagen planks. If the pain is more on the anterior side of the hip, things like straight leg heel touches are a great way to start to load that region with a very controlled range of motion. In a healthy setting, we want to be hitting heavy compound movements for the lower body to really make those hips more durable and resilient. Things like hip thrusts, squats, deadlifts, and lunges are a great place to start. But the hip is a joint that moves in all three planes, so we want to make sure to train other positions as well. Things like hip abduction and adduction are really important ways to train the upper glutes and the groin or adductors. And we can do things like cable striders to really tax the hip flexors through a full range of motion. So with all of these areas, you'll notice significant overlap with traditional strength training movements. And in Team EP, our flagship subscription service, we make sure to cover that meat and potatoes every single month. But each month also has a new focus where you might find more of those specific exercises to allow ourselves to really spread our approach and cover our bases. Last, but definitely not least, I want to talk about the mindset that it takes to recover completely from an injury. And that takes the form of what I like to call an anti-fragile mindset. Maybe the best counterexample to this is the popular YouTube video called "Jiu Jitsu Saved My Life but Destroyed My Body." If we don't have the right mindset or the right set of physical tools to be able to address injuries, we can often feel like we have this limited fuse left in terms of our training career. But having the right mindset and developing a staircase approach allows us to stay rooted in reality. The reality that we are probably going to get hurt at some point, and we have the power to be able to deal with that injury. So step one in this staircase approach is to assess what we can currently do. From that point in time, we try to set up a logical set of stairs to return us back to the sport that we were trying to play. In this case, rolling live jiu-jitsu. For example, if I hurt my knee, I would want to make sure that some of those lower stairs are things like being able to balance on one leg or do something like a lunge, long before I have somebody attacking my legs in jiu-jitsu. So step one is develop that staircase plan once we're hurt. Step two is making sure that we're really taking one step at a time along the way. Our power of focus is also really important here. We want to focus on the staircase that we're at, the things that we can currently do, and not spend too much time focusing on the top of the staircase or wishing that we were already back there right now. We also want to keep in mind that sometimes we have to temporarily go down a stair to be able to progress forward. This is okay. Rehab is never a perfectly linear or straight process, so we're going to have these little setbacks or speed bumps along the way to our ultimate goal of getting back to jiu-jitsu. And maybe the most important part of this is the understanding that our body is adaptable and capable of incredible healing. There's plenty of different examples of athletes who've experienced traumatic injuries. Athletes like Sean Livingston or Alex Smith come to mind, where they experienced significant trauma and they were able to come back and play their sport at the highest level despite having an injury that was so extensive that doctors told them they wouldn't be able to walk again. I say this not to belittle whatever injury you may be going through right now, but to give inspiration and to show you that given the right mindset, we can absolutely come back from almost any injury. One of the final things that we want to do on the staircase before we get back to jiu-jitsu is directly address the motion that caused the pain or injury in the first place. Any sort of trauma, in this case physical, involves facing that trauma. So to make sure that our body is ready for the demands of jiu-jitsu again, we have to be able to face the exact motion and the exact forces that caused that injury in the first place. Overall, if you take these different steps to heart, it puts the responsibility of healing in your hands and gives you an action-based approach to be able to pull yourself out of this state of injury and accept where you are at any one point in time. This prevents us from getting overly emotional and allows us to continue to take appropriate steps and get back to our sport. This step-by-step approach is always going to give us our best chance at a complete recovery. This is what it means to be anti-fragile. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please like, subscribe, and make sure to share it with somebody else who's constantly hurt or something. Check out my channel. Check out my other videos. I'm here to help. I'm here to help you. That's why I'm here. Why do I always do this at the end? It's always like this. Hey, subscribe. Hey, like this, please. Do you like me?